Today, I'll discuss some case studies on social media driven journalism in India. But before discussing social media driven journalism, I must analyze cyberculture, which is very much intertwined with the social media driven journalism. Now, I have to define what is cyberculture. It is a social phenomenon leading to a sense of commonality, a virtual space where people belonging to different demographics interact with each other unrecognized. It comprises a set of technologies, material, and intellectual practices, attitudes, modes of thought, and values developed along with the growth of cyberspace, a known place where people from several places with pretty different cultures, values of thoughts that grow along with the cyberspace. Cyberculture has utterance by practices included but not limited to global sharing, distributed creation, social networking, streaming, mass collaboration, collaborative assessment, social bookmarking, or cloud computing. These routines encourage commitment, participation, and empathy, making us irrevocably involved with and responsible for each other and provoking that experiences lived on cyberspace have an influence into ourselves by changing the way we think, the form of our communities, and our very identities. Pierre Levy situates the core of cyberculture in the fact that it embodies a new universality not based on the fixity and independence of signification, but built and extended by interconnecting messages through virtual communities, provoking the continuous renewal of the meanings and the performance of a collective intelligence, whereby people share their individual expertise in order to meet shared goals and objectives. The foundations of cyberculture as a concept and research domain developed in the 1960s at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Cyberspace as a mainstream term is often attributed to novelist William Gibson as it appears in his book, which was published in 1984, Neuromancer, in which Gibson describes an imaginary collective hallucination by means of connecting human consciousness to networked computers. Other science fiction writers whose work is associated with cyberculture, particularly cyberpunk as a subculture, include Philip K. Dick, Pat Cadigan, Rudy Rucker, and Bruce Sterling. Cyberculture also is related to the notion of cybernetics, a term popularized in a 1948 work by Norbert Wiener that refers to mechanisms involved with information exchange and feedback between human systems and machines. This idea was further developed by Donna Haraway in terms of a cyborg discourse and conversation between human and machines, which is crucial to the development of science and technology studies. The information age is a consequence of the digital revolution, and cyberculture is its manifestation of vitality and legitimacy over the decades, from the invention of the telegraph to the widespread adoption of digital communication tools and the proliferation of the network society. In the 1980s, cyberculture began to leave the university context and research centers through the spread of personal computers. It was the moment when a subculture anchored to digital avant-garde, hackers, video games, and virtual communities emerged, although still very restricted to North America and Western Europe. It was only in the 1990s that cyberculture as a practice consolidated with the beginning of what would become the generalization of the Internet and World Wide Web system in the early 21st century. Here, I have to discuss one more concept which is known as cyber activism. Cyber activism is a movement which is been perpetrated through using digital technology. One of the earliest cyber activism movements was PeaceNet, which began through email lists to promote in transnational human rights discussion. In 1994, the left wing Zapatista movement used the internet to support actions against the Mexican government to achieve democratic management of their territory, direct participation of the population, and the sharing of land. The Zapatistas considered the first informational guerrilla movement used hacktivism or manipulating computer systems or networks to promote a political ideology or social change. The origins of hacktivism began with the Zapatista movement, but the concept remained little known until 2003, the year that Anonymous was born. Anonymous was a decentralized online community acting anonymously and in a coordinated manner to promote internet freedom and freedom of expression and to fight what it considered unjust government actions. It carried out several actions intended to have a direct impact on society, including protests against the 2009 presidential election in Iran and against the Tunisian government's response to protesters in 2011. Anonymous released information online about alleged fraud in the Iranian presidential election in 2009 and about corruption in several Arab countries during the Arab Spring movement of which extended from 2010 till 2011. Social networks are also spaces where cyber activism is increasingly present, namely through the indexing of content and information streaming through hashtags. The cyberculture movement has undergone extensive developments with the expansion of the internet and network applications and has introduced a new form of culture. However, in contemporary times, cyberculture is no longer just a subculture or a culture of tribes. Instead, it has surpassed definitions closely associated with the science fiction of the 1980s. It can now be defined as the socio-cultural and political dynamics of digital technologies, which promotes a reformulation of social relations and the creation of communities in virtual space, while at the same time fostering the emergence of new behaviors and social practices. Cyberculture as a concept comes thus to describe and give meaning to the cultures and users' interactions developed through computer mediated channels, including online but also offline, virtual, and hybrid worlds. As computer mediated communication, cyberculture aggregates the symbolic patterns and representational structures in human computer interaction as well as interdependent values, practices, and artifacts. As such, the inquiry and analysis of cyberculture has found an academic space in cultural studies. Cultural anthropology, ethnographic methods have provided a strong foundation for the study of digital cultures or the ethnography of cyberspace, also referred to as nethnography. To talk about the evolution of cyberculture studies, the first cyberculture studies were divided into dystopias and utopias and were anchored to science fiction. Technophobes advocated a social fragmentation that stemmed from the political and economic alienation created by technology. Technophiles supported the idea of democratizing widespread access to communication, arguing that technology could create sustainable economic progress, stronger democracies, equality of information, and global solutions through a distributed intelligence network. Community and identity were two central lines of inquiry at this stage, followed by the economic implications and the imagined construction of cyberspace, its design and visual representation. A transdisciplinary approach to cyberculture studies has been evolving since 2000 onwards. This approach has gone beyond the field of cultural studies toward highly eclectic approaches to the social construction of technology, from hardware and software development, machine learning, and artificial intelligence to cybernetics, geography, and nanotechnologies. The future of work and internet memes. Cyberculture research has made explicit the pivotal agency of internet users and experts. As a part of my discussion on social media driven journalism in India, I have to discuss also journalism as propelled through social media platforms. However, the objective of the usage of social media platforms may vary in terms of information dissemination and information distortion. It is the choice of the individuals or a group of individuals to determine such objectives. When digital technologies and social media platforms are used for some broader objective or nationalist awakening, it is known as digital activism, which is also known as social media slacktivism. It is the use of digital communication technologies and social media platforms for the purpose of mass awakening and social reformation, or for a greater cause of people's benefit or socio political upliftment. Foster communication, citizen movement, and delivery of a local information to a large audience. One of the finest example of digital activism, which is technology mediated social participation, is the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring, it has its origin in Tunisia in December 2010. Mohamed Bouazi set fire to himself, a desperate act of defiance following his denied attempts to work as a street vendor to support his family. The scenes of his self immolation, captured by passerby and posted on YouTube, as well as those of the mass protests that followed his funeral, quickly circulated in Tunisia and beyond. The protests, nicknamed as the Jasmine Revolution, led to the installation of a coalition government following elections. While new technology helped opposition leadership organize protests and easily communicate with the followers. It is simplistic to say social media caused Tunisia's Jasmine revolution. The underlying economic and political causes were decades in the making. It is also unlikely to say that Facebook and Twitter would fill the leadership vacuum that existed in the country. Arab Spring revolution resembles very much to the revolutions of 1848. The term Arab Spring is an allusion to the revolutions of 1848, which are sometimes referred to as the springtime of nations and the Prague Spring in 1968, in which a Czech student, Jean Palas, set himself on fire as Mohammad Bouazi did. In the aftermath of the Iraq War, it was used by various commentators and bloggers who anticipated a major Arab movement towards democratization. The first specific use of the term Arab Spring, as used to denote these events, may have started with the US political journal Foreign Policy. Political scientist Mark Lynch described Arab Spring as a term that have unintentionally coined on 6th January 2011 article for Foreign Policy magazine. Joseph Massad on Al Jazeera said the term was a part of a US Secretary of controlling the movement's aims and goals and directing it towards Western style liberal democracy. When Arab Spring protests in some countries were followed by electoral success for Islamist parties, some American pundits coined the terms Islamist Spring and Islamist Winter. On January 11th, protests reached the center of the capital city of Tunisia, and Tunisian president responded by ordering in the army and imposing a nighttime curfew. The next day, tens of thousands of people took to the street in Sfax, Tunisia's second city. On January 14, 2011, Tunisian President Ben Ali fled the country, ousted by a spontaneous populist uprising. Tunisia's population of 10 million people, known for their high levels of education and civic pride, became the first people in the Arab world to take to the streets and oust al leader. This Arab Spring movement then spread to Egypt. Google executive Wael Gohim helped spark Egypt's 2011 unrest. Egyptian businessman Khalid Said died after being beaten by police who had videotaped themselves taking confiscated marijuana. Hoping to draw attention to police corruption, he copied that video and posted it on YouTube. Ghanem created a Facebook page called We Are All, Khalid said. It featured horrific photos shot with a cell phone in the morgue of Said's face. That visual evidence undermined the official explanations of his death. At its core, the revolution represents a force that is much more willing to criticize authority and tolerate diversity than perhaps mainstream public opinion. The original throngs that fought riot, police drew on at least three major and messily overlapping constituencies. First were the activists, organizers of all political and religious stripes who had come to trust each other over years of strikes, tiny protests, and mass arrests. Second were the politicized people previously afraid to challenge the regime, but who brought to the protests a distinct agenda, that is, labor unionists, socialists, liberal NGO, that is, non government organizations, workers, and more conservative religious activists. Finally, there were the hundreds of thousands of angry and apolitical Egyptians sick of Mubarak's police state. Then, Arab Spring spread over Lebanon, Syria, and Libya. As the protests spread across the Arab world, activists in Lebanon began to unite with the goal of ousting the sectarian system. These activists managed to reach around 15,000 people through a Facebook group entitled In Favor of Ousting the Lebanese Sectarian System Towards a Secular System. The group was comprised of youth from different sects, regions, and cultural backgrounds. However, it was the sectarian and divided nature of Lebanese youth partisanship that rendered it difficult to use social media to mobilize young people through a common goal. Social media played a different role in Tunisia and Egypt's anti government or anti establishment movement than in Libya and Yemen. There is not the kind of strong tradition of online activism in Libya and Yemen as there is in another Arab countries. In Libya, there is a lack of internet infrastructure, online access is difficult, and the Gaddafi regime has limited social media platforms. In Yemen, government controls and extreme poverty limit internet use. Unfortunately, in these countries, technological barriers to social media, coupled with severe totalitarian regimes, stymied reform efforts. So, to conclude, I must say the case studies I've discussed just now, which is the Arab Spring Revolution, illustrate the profound impact of social media on digital journalism in the world. While in India also we have several instances of such activism which started from 2000 onwards, and I will focus on this in my next session. So, another point I must iterate here that social media activism offers unprecedented opportunities for engagement and storytelling. It also poses significant challenges, particularly concerning misinformation and ethical reporting. As the media landscape continues to evolve, it is crucial for digital journalists to adapt to these changes, harnessing the power of social media while upholding the principles of responsible journalism. The future of journalism in India will undoubtedly be shaped by the ongoing interplay between traditional media and social media platforms. Thank you very much.